The rain hammered against the windows of my cramped Amsterdam apartment like an angry ex-wife demanding entry, which, considering my recent circumstances, felt oddly appropriate. I took another sip of cheap Dutch beer and stared at the notification on my phone that had just ruined what was shaping up to be a perfectly mediocre Tuesday evening. Elena Parker is now married to Jason Drake. 3 weeks. It took my ex-wife exactly 3 weeks after our divorce was finalized to marry her insurance broker lover. Not that I was counting or anything. My name is Nathan Parker, and 6 months ago I thought I had it all figured out. 12 years in Army intelligence, followed by 8 years building a successful security consulting business in Detroit. A beautiful wife, a nice house in the suburbs, and enough money in the bank to sleep soundly at night. Then I discovered Elena's affair with Jason, and my carefully constructed life went up in flames. Literally, as it turned out. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Elena's lawyer, a shark in an expensive suit, painted me as an unstable veteran with anger issues. Meanwhile, Elena played the role of the suffering wife married to a paranoid control freak who couldn't adjust to civilian life. The judge bought it hook, line, and sinker. I lost the house, half my assets, and somehow ended up paying alimony to a woman who made more money than me. But the real kicker came 2 weeks before the divorce was final, when my warehouse burned down under mysterious circumstances. 20 years of client files, computer equipment, and specialized security gear worth over $200,000 reduced to ash and twisted metal. The insurance company dragged their feet on the claim, citing irregularities in the fire investigation. Translation: they thought I torched my own business for the money. With my assets frozen and legal bills mounting, I took what little cash I had left and bought a one-way ticket to Amsterdam. Starting fresh seemed like the only option that didn't involve a padded cell or a bottle of sleeping pills. But Elena couldn't resist one final twist of the knife. The wedding photos were everywhere on social media, tagged with mutual friends who would make sure I saw them. Elena in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Jason in a tuxedo that screamed, "I can afford better lawyers than your ex-husband." The happy couple looked radiant as they exchanged vows at some upscale venue in downtown Detroit. I was studying the photos with the dedication of a forensic analyst when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in months. Vivian Ortega, my former insurance adjuster and one of the few people who hadn't completely written me off during the divorce. "Nathan, thank God you answered." Viv's voice carried that familiar mix of caffeine addiction and chronic skepticism that made her so good at her job. "I need to tell you something about Elena's wedding." "Let me guess. The ice sculpture was shaped like my burned warehouse?" "This is serious, Nathan. I was there." That stopped me cold. "You were at Elena's wedding? Why the hell would you?" "Because I'm still investigating your warehouse fire, and I had a hunch about something. Jason Drake wasn't just Elena's lover, Nathan. He was also the broker who handled your business insurance policy." The beer bottle slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. "What did you just say?" Jason Drake, Elena's new husband, is the same Jason Drake from Drake Insurance Services, the guy who sold you that policy 2 years ago, the one that's now mysteriously difficult to collect on, the same guy who's been sleeping with your wife for God knows how long. I sank into the nearest chair as the implications hit me like a freight train. They planned this. The affair, the divorce, the fire. They burned down my business for the insurance money. That's what I'm thinking. But Nathan, there's more. I recorded something at the wedding reception that you need to hear. You recorded the wedding. I wore a wire, old habits from my police days. During the champagne toast, I said something that made Elena completely lose her mind in front of 200 guests. The whole thing is on audio, and some of the guests got it on video too. My hands were shaking as I reached for another beer. "What did you say?" I stood up during the toast and said, "Here's to Elena and Jason. May your marriage burn as bright as Nathan's warehouse did the night you two torched it together." Elena went white as a sheet, then started screaming at me to get out. Jason tried to play it off as a joke, but you could see the panic in his eyes. Half the wedding party was recording the meltdown on their phones. Jesus Christ, Viv. You just accused them of arson in front of half of Detroit's insurance industry. That was the point. Nathan, I've been digging into this for months. I found security footage from a gas station 3 blocks from your warehouse. Jason's BMW was there at 2 in the morning the night of the fire, filling up a gas can. I also found accelerant residue samples that the fire department somehow missed in their initial investigation. I was pacing now, my mind racing through the possibilities. Do you have enough evidence to prove it? I think so, but here's the thing. Elena and Jason are supposed to leave for their honeymoon in Belize tomorrow. If they get out of the country before I can present this evidence to the FBI, we might lose our chance. What do you need me to do? I need you to come back to Detroit. Tonight. I've already contacted Agent Sarah Mitchell at the FBI's White Collar Crime Division. She's interested in what I have, but she wants to interview you as well. Your testimony about the timing of the fire, combined with my evidence, might be enough to get arrest warrants. I looked around my sparse Amsterdam apartment. 3 weeks ago, I thought I was starting a new life in Europe. Now I was being offered a chance at something I'd given up hoping for, justice. Book me on the next flight to Detroit, I said. It's time to return the favor. The flight back to Detroit felt like traveling through time. Every mile brought me closer to a life I'd tried to leave behind, but also closer to answers I desperately needed. Viv picked me up at the airport in her battered Honda, looking exactly the same as when I'd left. Short black hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of no-nonsense attitude that made insurance fraudsters break out in cold sweats. "You look like hell," she said by way of greeting. 3 weeks of Dutch beer and self-pity will do that to you. Tell me more about this evidence you've collected. Viv handed me a thick manila folder as she navigated through airport traffic. It's all in there. Security footage, accelerant residue analysis, financial records showing Jason's access to your insurance file months before the fire. But the real smoking gun is what I recorded at the wedding. I opened the folder and started reading. The security footage timestamps showed Jason's BMW at the gas station at 2:17 a.m. on the night of the fire. The warehouse fire was reported at 3:45 a.m. The accelerant residue analysis showed traces of gasoline in 3 separate locations throughout the building, a clear sign of arson. How did the fire department miss this? They didn't miss it. Someone made sure it disappeared from the official report. I had to go through back channels to get the original lab results. Someone with connections in the fire department? Or someone with connections to people who have connections. Jason's been in the insurance business for 15 years. He knows everyone, fire investigators, police detectives, city officials. It wouldn't be hard for him to make evidence disappear, especially if he had help from someone on the inside. We drove through downtown Detroit, past the ruins of the auto industry and the gleaming new developments that promised urban renewal. The city was a study in contrasts, decay and rebirth existing side by side, much like my own situation. Where are we meeting Agent Mitchell? FBI field office on Michigan Avenue. She's expecting us in an hour. Nathan, I need to prepare you for something. This isn't going to be easy. Elena and Jason have been spinning their own narrative about you since the divorce. They're claiming you're an unstable veteran who's been harassing them. Jason filed a restraining order last week. A restraining order? I've been in Amsterdam for 3 weeks. Doesn't matter. He claims you've been making threatening phone calls and sending harassing emails. It's all fabricated, but it gives them cover if you show up making accusations about arson. I felt the familiar rage building in my chest, the same anger that had gotten me in trouble during the divorce proceedings. But this time, I forced myself to stay calm. Rage wouldn't help me now. I needed to be smart, calculated, and absolutely certain of my facts. What about the recording from the wedding? Viv smiled for the first time since picking me up. That's where things get interesting. Elena's reaction was so extreme that several guests started asking questions. Word is already spreading through their social circle that something's not right. Jason's been doing damage control all week, claiming I'm a disgruntled former employee trying to cause trouble. Are you? A disgruntled former employee, I mean. Technically, I still work for Great Lakes Insurance. They're the company that's been stalling on your claim. But I've been conducting my own investigation off the books, using vacation time and personal resources. If this blows up, I could lose my job. Viv, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Nathan, you were one of the good guys. 12 years in the Army, 8 years building an honest business, never so much as a speeding ticket on your record. Then Elena and her boyfriend destroy your life for a quick payday. If I don't stand up for people like you, who will? We pulled into the FBI building parking lot. Agent Mitchell was waiting for us in the lobby, a woman in her 40s with the kind of sharp intelligence that made criminals confess just to avoid disappointing her. She led us to a conference room and spread Viv's evidence across the table. Mr. Parker, I've reviewed Ms. Ortega's findings, and I have to say this is compelling evidence of insurance fraud and arson conspiracy. However, there are some complications we need to discuss. Such as? Your ex-wife and her new husband have retained one of Detroit's most expensive law firms. They're claiming this is a harassment campaign orchestrated by a bitter ex-husband with military training and psychological issues. They've provided the court with documentation of your alleged threatening behavior. I started to protest, but Agent Mitchell held up her hand. I said, alleged. We've examined the evidence they provided, and frankly, it looks fabricated. The email headers don't match, the phone records have gaps, and the timeline doesn't work given your location in Amsterdam. But it does show they've been preparing for this possibility. What does that mean for the case? It means they knew someone might eventually figure out what they did. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. This was a carefully planned conspiracy that they've been covering up from day one. Agent Mitchell pulled out a digital recorder and placed it on the table. Ms. Ortega, I'd like you to play the recording from the wedding reception. Viv connected her phone to the recorder. The audio quality was surprisingly clear, the result of professional-grade equipment she'd borrowed from her old police contacts. I could hear the ambient noise of the reception, glasses clinking, conversations in the background. Then Viv's voice, loud and clear. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to propose a toast to the happy couple. Elena and Jason, may your marriage burn as bright as Nathan Parker's warehouse did the night you two torched it together. Cheers. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Elena's voice, shrill with panic. What did you just say? Security, get this crazy woman out of here. Jason's voice, trying to maintain control. Ladies and gentlemen, please ignore this disruption. Ms. Ortega is clearly intoxicated and doesn't know what she's talking about. But then came Elena's voice again, and this time she said something that made Agent Mitchell sit up straight. Jason, she knows. Oh God, she knows about the gas can? The recording continued for another 30 seconds, capturing Elena's complete breakdown and Jason's increasingly desperate attempts to control the situation. Several wedding guests could be heard asking questions. What gas can? What's she talking about? Did Elena just admit to something? Agent Mitchell stopped the recording. Mr. Parker, based on this evidence and Ms. Ortega's investigation, I'm prepared to recommend federal charges for insurance fraud, arson conspiracy, and mail fraud. However, I need you to understand something. Elena and Jason left for Belize this morning, earlier than originally planned. They're currently outside our jurisdiction. They ran? It appears so. Their flight was originally scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Instead, they took a 6 a.m. flight this morning. No return date booked. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. After everything Viv had done, all the evidence we'd gathered, Elena and Jason were going to escape justice by hiding in a country with no extradition treaty. But Agent Mitchell wasn't finished. However, there's something they don't know. Based on the evidence Ms. Ortega provided, I was able to get a federal judge to freeze their assets yesterday evening. Every bank account, every credit card, every investment account they have access to is now locked down. They're stuck in Belize with whatever cash they had in their pockets. How long can you hold their assets? As long as the investigation remains active. And Mr. Parker, I have a feeling this investigation is going to take a very long time. For the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. 3 days later, I was sitting in Viv's apartment, watching the local news coverage of what reporters were calling the wedding toast scandal. And Elena and Jason's society wedding had become the talk of Detroit's social media, with multiple videos of Elena's meltdown going viral. The local news stations had picked up the story, though they were being careful about legal implications. Channel 7 just ran another segment, Viv said, joining me on the couch with 2 cups of coffee. They interviewed 3 wedding guests who all said Elena's reaction was completely out of proportion to what you'd expect from someone who was innocent. On screen, a well-dressed woman in her 50s was speaking to a reporter. I've known Elena for 10 years through the country club. I've never seen her lose control like that. When that woman mentioned the warehouse fire, Elena looked like she'd seen a ghost. Then she started screaming about gas cans and calling for security. It was very strange behavior for someone who supposedly had nothing to hide. The reporter, a young man with perfectly styled hair and an expression of practiced concern, turned to face the camera. The FBI has confirmed they are investigating allegations of insurance fraud related to the warehouse fire mentioned at the reception. Elena Parker Drake and her new husband, Jason Drake, are currently out of the country and unavailable for comment. My phone rang. Agent Mitchell's name appeared on the caller ID. Mr. Parker, we've had an interesting development. Jason Drake just called the FBI field office from Belize. He called you? Apparently, they've discovered their assets are frozen. Drake claims he wants to clear up this misunderstanding and is demanding to speak with someone in authority. He's also hired a local attorney in Belize City who's been making inquiries about extradition procedures. That sounds like panic to me. I agree, but here's where it gets interesting. Drake specifically asked about making a deal. He wants to know what kind of sentence reduction he might get for cooperating with the investigation. I sat up straight. He's willing to flip on Elena? That's what it sounds like. Apparently being stuck in a foreign country with no access to money has a way of clarifying one's priorities. I'm flying down to Belize tomorrow to conduct a preliminary interview. Can I come with you? Absolutely not. You're a witness in this case, not an investigator. But Mr. Parker, I want you to prepare yourself for the possibility that Jason Drake might provide testimony that implicates your ex-wife as the primary architect of this conspiracy. After Agent Mitchell hung up, I found myself staring out Viv's apartment window at the Detroit skyline. For months, I'd been consumed with rage at both Elena and Jason. The idea that Jason might betray Elena to save himself should have felt like victory. Instead, I felt strangely empty. "You're thinking too hard," Viv said, settling back down on the couch. "This is good news. If Jason flips, Elena's finished." "I know. It's just, I spent 12 years married to her. There were good times before everything went wrong. It's hard to reconcile the woman I fell in love with someone who would burn down my business for money." "People change, Nathan. Or maybe they just show you who they really were all along." My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The area code was from Belize. "Nathan, this is Jason. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that the warehouse fire wasn't my idea. Elena planned the whole thing. She said you were too stupid to ever figure it out." "I'm sorry about everything. I'm going to tell the FBI the truth." I showed the text to Viv. She read it twice, then shook her head. Classic criminal behavior. Now that he's caught, suddenly it's all someone else's fault. Don't let him manipulate you, Nathan. "I'm not. But if he's telling the truth about Elena planning everything, then she's going to prison for a very long time." The next morning, Agent Mitchell called with an update from Belize. Jason had agreed to full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony painted Elena as the mastermind of an elaborate insurance fraud scheme that had been in planning for over a year. According to Jason, Elena had approached him about the warehouse fire 6 months before it happened. She'd discovered that Nathan's business insurance policy had a clause that would pay double damages for fires caused by criminal acts, provided the policyholder wasn't involved. The plan was to burn down the warehouse, collect the insurance money, and split it after Elena divorced Nathan. Drake claims Elena told him the divorce was already inevitable because she'd grown tired of being married to what she called a broken soldier. Agent Mitchell explained. The insurance money was supposed to fund their new life together. What about the accelerant evidence? Drake provided detailed information about how they planned and executed the arson. Elena purchased the gasoline using cash. Jason provided the accelerant and timing devices through contacts in the construction industry. They waited until Nathan was out of town on a consulting job, then set multiple fires throughout the warehouse to ensure total destruction. And the missing evidence from the fire department investigation? Drake gave us the name of a fire investigator who was paid to alter his report. We're bringing him in for questioning this afternoon. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. For months, I'd questioned my own sanity, wondering if I really was the unstable ex-husband that Elena's lawyers had painted me as. Now I had confirmation that my instincts had been right all along, but at the cost of discovering that the woman I'd once loved was capable of destroying my life for money. Agent Mitchell, what happens to Elena now? That depends on whether she decides to come back and face the charges, or if she wants to spend the rest of her life as a fugitive in Belize. Either way, she's looking at federal charges for insurance fraud, arson conspiracy, and money laundering. We're talking about 15 to 20 years in federal prison. And Jason? With his cooperation, probably 5 to 7 years. He'll also have to pay full restitution for the insurance fraud, which means you'll eventually recover your losses plus damages. After the call ended, I walked out onto Viv's balcony and looked out over the city where I'd built and lost everything. Detroit was a city that understood rebuilding after destruction, starting over when everything seemed hopeless. Maybe there was something appropriate about the fact that my own resurrection was beginning here. My phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Elena's number. "Hello, Nathan." Her voice sounded different, smaller, defeated. "I suppose you've heard about Jason's betrayal." "I've heard about his confession, if that's what you mean." "I want you to know that I never meant for things to go this far. The warehouse fire was supposed to be a simple insurance claim. No one was supposed to get hurt. No one except me. You were going to be fine. The insurance money would have covered your losses, and you could have rebuilt. We just needed enough money to start fresh somewhere else." I felt the old rage building again, but this time I kept my voice calm. "Elena, you destroyed my business, my reputation, and my life. You cost me my home, my savings, and nearly my sanity, and you did it all while lying to my face and pretending to love me." "I did love you, Nathan. I needed something different, something more exciting than the life we had together." "So you decided to commit multiple felonies with your insurance broker boyfriend?" Jason said it would be easy. He said no one would ever figure it out. He said, "Elena, stop. Just stop. Jason's already told the FBI everything. The planning, the execution, the cover-up. It's over." There was a long pause. When Elena spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. Are you going to testify against me? Elena, you burned down my warehouse. You stole my life savings. You tried to have me painted as a mentally unstable veteran to cover your crimes. What do you think? I think you always were a vindictive bastard when someone crossed you. And with that, she hung up. It was the last time I would ever speak to my ex-wife. 2 weeks later, I was back in Agent Mitchell's office, reviewing Jason's detailed confession and preparing for Elena's extradition hearing. Jason had provided a timeline of the conspiracy that read like a manual for insurance fraud, complete with dates, locations, and recorded conversations he'd secretly made with Elena. Drake was more thorough than we initially thought, Agent Mitchell said, sliding a transcript across the table. He recorded over 30 hours of conversations with Elena, apparently as insurance against her betraying him first. These recordings detail every aspect of the conspiracy, including Elena's plans to frame you for the fire if the investigation got too close. I read through the transcript, feeling sick as Elena's words jumped off the page. In one conversation, recorded just 2 days before the warehouse fire, she told Jason, "If anything goes wrong, we'll say Nathan did it himself for the insurance money. Everyone knows he's been unstable since he got out of the army. It'll be easy to make people believe he snapped." She really thought this through. Elena Parker Drake is one of the most calculating criminals I've encountered in 20 years with the Bureau. She didn't just plan to commit insurance fraud, she planned to destroy your life completely if it became necessary to protect herself. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Elena had been arrested at the Belize City airport attempting to board a flight to Costa Rica using a fake passport. The accompanying photo showed her in handcuffs, looking haggard and desperate, a far cry from the radiant bride in the wedding photos from just a month earlier. That was faster than expected, Agent Mitchell said, checking her own phone. Belize authorities were supposed to hold her for another week while we finalized extradition paperwork. What changed? Jason's cooperation. He told us about Elena's contingency plans, including the fake passport and a bank account in Costa Rica with $50,000 that she'd been hiding from the divorce proceedings. When we shared that information with Belizean authorities, they decided Elena was a flight risk and moved to arrest her immediately. The news coverage of Elena's arrest dominated local media for the next 3 days. The story had everything reporters loved: wealthy socialites, insurance fraud, a dramatic wedding meltdown, and an international manhunt. Elena's mugshot was plastered across every newspaper and website in Detroit. But the coverage that interested me most came from Elena's former friends and colleagues. The same people who had sided with her during the divorce were now distancing themselves as quickly as possible. I always thought there was something off about Elena's relationship with that insurance broker, her former country club president told Channel 7 News. The way they looked at each other during business meetings, it was obvious something inappropriate was happening. Elena's former business partner was even more direct. Elena Parker Drake is a sociopath who destroyed an innocent man's life for money. I'm ashamed I ever associated with her. The social media pile-on was brutal and swift. Elena's Facebook page was flooded with comments from former friends expressing shock and disgust. Her LinkedIn profile was deleted within hours of her arrest. Wedding guests were posting their own videos of her meltdown, each one adding their own commentary about the obvious signs they'd missed. Public opinion has turned completely against her, Viv observed, scrolling through the latest social media posts. Even people who supported her during the divorce are calling her a criminal now. Good. Maybe that will make it easier for a jury to convict her. Nathan, there's something else you should know. Elena's lawyer reached out to Agent Mitchell yesterday. She wants to make a deal. What kind of deal? Full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence. She's apparently terrified of spending 20 years in federal prison. I thought about Elena's phone call from Belize, her claims that she'd never meant for things to go so far. Now, faced with the reality of serious prison time, she was ready to admit the truth. What did Agent Mitchell tell her lawyer? That the time for deals has passed. Elena had multiple opportunities to confess and make things right. Instead, she chose to flee the country and try to frame you for her crimes. The government isn't interested in negotiating. 3 days later, Elena was extradited back to Detroit and arraigned on federal charges. I attended the hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom as Elena shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles. She looked older, defeated, nothing like the confident woman who had destroyed my life just months earlier. The judge read the charges: conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, arson in the first degree, money laundering, and mail fraud. Each charge carried a maximum sentence of 10 to 20 years in federal prison. Elena's lawyer requested bail, but the prosecutor argued successfully that she was a flight risk given her recent attempt to flee to Costa Rica. The defendant has demonstrated a pattern of deception and manipulation that spans over a year, the prosecutor told the judge. She destroyed evidence, bribed officials, and attempted to frame her ex-husband for her crimes. Most recently, she fled the country using a fake passport and attempted to access hidden assets in foreign bank accounts. There is no reason to believe she would appear for trial if released on bail. The judge agreed. Elena would remain in federal custody until trial. As the bailiff led Elena away, she turned and looked directly at me, for the first time since entering the courtroom. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of rage and desperation that I'd never seen before. For just a moment, I saw past the facade of the sophisticated socialite to something darker underneath. That night, Viv and I went to dinner at a restaurant downtown, the first time I'd felt like celebrating anything in months. "So what's next for you?" she asked over dessert. "Agent Mitchell says the trial will probably be in 6 months. After that, assuming Elena's convicted, I'll get restitution for the warehouse fire plus damages. Enough to rebuild the business, maybe even expand it." "Are you going to stay in Detroit?" "I think so. Amsterdam was nice, but this is home. Besides, I've got some scores to settle with people who wrote me off during the divorce." "Such as?" "Former clients who dropped me when Elena's lawyer started spreading rumors about my mental health. Friends who believed her version of events without asking for my side of the story. Business associates who suddenly became too busy to return my phone calls." Viv smiled. "Revenge is a dish best served cold?" "Something like that. But this time, I'm going to be smart about it. No more losing my temper, no more playing into their narrative about the unstable veteran. I'm going to rebuild my business, restore my reputation, and let my success speak for itself." "And Elena?" "Elena's going to spend the next 15 years in federal prison, thinking about what it cost her to betray someone who loved her. I think that's punishment enough." As we walked back to Viv's car, my phone rang. Agent Mitchell's number appeared on the caller ID. "Mr. Parker, I wanted to give you a heads up. Elena's cellmate at the Federal Detention Center called the tip line tonight. Apparently, Elena's been making some interesting statements about other insurance fraud schemes she's been involved in over the years. This case might be bigger than we initially thought." "How much bigger?" "We're looking at potentially dozens of fraudulent claims over the past 5 years, involving multiple insurance companies and millions of dollars in false payouts. Elena Parker Drake wasn't just a cheating wife who got greedy. She was running a sophisticated criminal enterprise." I looked up at the Detroit skyline, thinking about the woman I'd been married to for 12 years. How many other lives had she destroyed? How many other victims were out there, thinking they were crazy or paranoid or just unlucky? "Agent Mitchell, whatever you need from me to bring down her entire operation, you've got it." "I was hoping you'd say that, because we're going to need your help to identify all of Elena's victims and unravel this conspiracy completely." For the first time since discovering Elena's affair, I felt like I had a real purpose again. Not just getting justice for myself, but for everyone Elena had victimized over the years. It was going to be a long road, but I was ready for the fight. 6 months later, I sat in the front row of the federal courthouse as Elena's trial reached its dramatic conclusion. The prosecution had spent 3 weeks methodically destroying every aspect of her defense, using Jason's recordings, financial records, and testimony from a dozen other victims to paint a picture of a criminal enterprise that had stolen over $3 million through fraudulent insurance claims. Elena's defense team had tried everything, claiming she was manipulated by Jason, arguing that she was mentally unstable due to the stress of her marriage, even suggesting that I had somehow orchestrated the entire conspiracy to frame her. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Elena's own recorded words condemned her at every turn. The moment I'd been waiting for came when Elena herself took the stand in a desperate last-ditch attempt to save herself. Under oath, she finally told the complete truth about the warehouse fire and the conspiracy that had destroyed my life. "I planned the warehouse fire because I wanted out of my marriage and I needed money to start over," she testified, her voice barely audible. "Nathan was a good man who didn't deserve what I did to him, but I felt trapped in a life that was suffocating me, and Jason convinced me that insurance fraud was a victimless crime." The prosecutor pressed her for details. "Ms. Parker Drake, you testified that your husband was a good man who didn't deserve what you did to him. Yet you also attempted to frame him for arson when the investigation began to focus on you. Can you explain this contradiction?" Elena broke down completely. "I was scared. I knew if I got caught, I'd lose everything. Jason said we could make it look like Nathan did it himself, that everyone would believe it because of his military background and the stress of our divorce. I knew it was wrong, but I was desperate." "So you were willing to send an innocent man to prison to avoid consequences for your crimes?" "Yes. God help me, yes." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Elena was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 18 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Jason, who had cooperated fully with the investigation, received 8 years. Both were ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, which in my case amounted to over $400,000. But the real vindication came in the weeks following the trial, as news of Elena's conviction spread through Detroit's business and social communities. Every person who had sided with her during the divorce, every friend who had believed her lies about my mental instability, every business associate who had dropped me based on her accusations, they all reached out with apologies and offers to make amends. My former business partner called to offer me a position with his security firm. "Nathan, I owe you an apology. I should have known Elena was lying about you. You were always the most honest person I knew." A former client who had canceled a major contract during the divorce proceedings sent me an email. "I saw the news about Elena's conviction. I'm ashamed that I believed her stories about your instability. If you're rebuilding your business, I'd like to be your first client again." Even Elena's former friends reached out, many of them confessing that they'd suspected something was wrong, but had been afraid to speak up. Elena always had a cruel streak, one of them told me over coffee. During the divorce, she would laugh about how she was destroying your reputation. She said you deserved it for being boring and predictable. I should have said something, but I was afraid of becoming her next target. With the restitution money and new clients lining up, I was able to not only rebuild my security consulting business, but expand it beyond what I'd achieved before the fire. I hired Viv as my head of investigations, poaching her from Great Lakes Insurance with an offer she couldn't refuse. "You know Elena's going to spend the next 18 years thinking about how she could have had all of this if she'd just been honest," Viv said, looking around our new office space in downtown Detroit. "I hope she does think about it. I hope she thinks about it every single day." But my real vindication came from an unexpected source. 6 months after Elena's sentencing, I received a letter from her in federal prison. The return address showed she was incarcerated at a maximum security facility in West Virginia, far from the luxury and sophistication she'd once taken for granted. "Nathan," the letter began, "I know I have no right to contact you, and I don't expect you to respond. But I needed you to know that I understand now what I threw away when I betrayed you. Prison has given me time to think about the person I became, and I'm horrified by what I see. You were a good husband who deserved better than what I gave you. I destroyed something beautiful because I was too selfish and stupid to appreciate what I had. I hope you found happiness and peace. You deserve both. Elena." I read the letter twice, then filed it away without responding. Elena had said everything that needed to be said during her testimony. There was nothing left between us except the consequences of her choices. A year later, I was featured on the cover of Detroit Business Magazine as Entrepreneur of the Year. The article detailed how I'd rebuilt my business after being victimized by insurance fraud, turning a personal tragedy into professional success. The photo showed me standing in front of our expanded office, surrounded by a team of 20 employees. But the moment that meant the most to me came at the end of the article, in a quote that summed up everything I'd learned from the experience. People sometimes ask me if I'm bitter about what my ex-wife did to me. The truth is, Elena gave me something valuable when she betrayed me. She showed me who my real friends were, what I was truly capable of, and how much stronger I was than I'd ever imagined. In trying to destroy me, she actually set me free. The day the magazine hit newsstands, I received a call from Agent Mitchell. "Nathan, I thought you'd want to know. Elena's been placed in solitary confinement after attacking another inmate who made a comment about her magazine coverage. Apparently, seeing your success has been difficult for her to accept." How much time did she get added to her sentence? 6 months. But more importantly, it shows she's still the same person who burned down your warehouse when she didn't get what she wanted. Prison hasn't changed her fundamental character. That evening, I had dinner with Viv at the same restaurant where we'd celebrated Elena's arrest 2 years earlier. We'd both come a long way since then. Viv had been promoted to partner in my firm, and I'd been invited to speak at law enforcement conferences about insurance fraud detection. "Any regrets?" Viv asked over dessert. "About Elena?" "None. She made her choices, and she's living with the consequences. I made mine, and I'm living with those consequences too." "What about the marriage? Do you ever wonder what would have happened if she'd just been honest about wanting a divorce?" "Sometimes. But then I remember that Elena was never capable of honesty, even about small things. She lied about where she was going, who she was seeing, what she was thinking. The warehouse fire wasn't an aberration. It was the logical conclusion of a pattern that had been building for years. And now? Now I'm building something real, something that can't be destroyed by lies or betrayal or fraud. Elena taught me that the only person you can really trust is yourself, and the only security that matters is what you create with your own hands. My phone buzzed with a text message. The sender was identified as Linda Morrison, a name I didn't recognize. "Mr. Parker, you don't know me, but but I was married to someone who worked with Elena in her insurance fraud schemes. I saw your magazine article, and I wanted you to know that there are others like us, spouses who were victimized by people we trusted. Would you be interested in starting a support group for fraud victims?" I showed the text to Viv. She smiled and raised her wine glass. "Looks like your story isn't over yet." "No," I agreed, typing a response to Linda. "I think it's just beginning." 3 years after Elena burned down my warehouse, I was standing on the roof of my new office building, looking out over the Detroit skyline. The city stretched out below me, a testament to the power of rebuilding after destruction. In the distance, I could see the lot where my old warehouse had stood, now home to a small park with a plaque commemorating the victims of insurance fraud. My business had grown into one of the largest security consulting firms in the Midwest. Viv and I had started a nonprofit organization that helped fraud victims navigate the legal system and rebuild their lives. I'd testified before Congress about insurance fraud prevention and had been featured in documentaries about white-collar crime. But the real measure of my success wasn't in the money or recognition. It was in the knowledge that I'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to me and turned it into something that helped other people. Elena still had 15 years left on her sentence. According to Agent Mitchell, she'd been denied parole twice and had accumulated additional time for various infractions. Prison had not been kind to someone accustomed to luxury and control. I didn't take pleasure in her suffering, but I felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that justice had been served. Elena had gambled everything on the belief that she could destroy my life without consequences. Instead, she'd destroyed her own life and given me the motivation to become more successful than I'd ever dreamed possible. As the sun set over Detroit, I thought about the letter Elena had sent me from prison, her claim that she finally understood what she'd thrown away. The truth was simpler and more damning than her melodramatic confession. Elena had never loved me enough to choose honesty over deception, loyalty over betrayal, or partnership over personal gain. In trying to burn down my life, she'd only succeeded in burning down her own. And from the ashes of her betrayal, I'd built something stronger, more honest, and more valuable than anything we'd ever shared together. That was the real revenge. Not Elena's imprisonment, but my success. Not her downfall, but my rise. Not the destruction of what we'd had together, but the creation of something better without her. I walked back to the elevator, ready to go home to a life that